Hello and welcome. This is Professor Svark, and today we're going to walk through selected topics in Chapter 10. I just want to remind you that ACC Sessions are selected tutorials from the chapter. You are responsible to learn all the material from this chapter, and if you have any questions, make sure that you seek help either from myself or in the Tutoring Center in F315. So Chapter 10 is all about bonds, and these are not the same types of bonds that maybe you received or given as gifts in the past. Those are Series EE bonds where you pay for the bond, and then at the end of the life of the bond you can exchange them for a higher value. These are company-issued bonds. Companies can issue these bonds kind of like a note, where they get their investors to buy the bonds. They provide semi-annual interest payments or some other term of interest payment. They could be quarterly or monthly or annual interest payments. But in this textbook, we're going to concentrate only on semi-annual interest payments. So the company has to pay these semi-annual interest payments. And then at the life of the bond, they pay back the amount. So it's kind of a cross between a note, except that that would come from a bank or from one party. And bonds are sold to multiple people, multiple investors. So in that sense, it's almost like a common stock issuance. Okay, so kind of a cross between stock and a note. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're also going to learn journal entries. We're going to learn how to compute the selling price, and then we're going to touch just a tiny bit on long-term notes payable. So here's a nice picture of a bond, kind of a bond transaction. So here's the company. The company needs cash. So instead of going to the bank to get the cash, they're going to float a bond, kind of like the same way that you would float stock issuance. So they get multiple investors to buy this bond, except instead of common stock where you don't have to pay interest on that, bonds pay interest. So these investors will receive semi-annual interest payments through the life of the bond. They will not get principal or the par value paid back until the end of the life of the bond. Okay, so this is a nice picture to just kind of show you the process of a bond. Now the thing about bonds is that there's several factors that go into pricing a bond. So when you float a bond, it's not a very easy process. You have to have multiple factors. One of the things that you have to have done is you have to have a company kind of like a Moody's come in and evaluate your company and evaluate whether or not they feel that you're going to be able to make the payments back. So you would get evaluated, you would go through all this paperwork and process and approval to float a bond. And you would issue a stated rate. So you would say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and sell $300,000 of bonds, and I will pay my investors maybe 8%, let's say. Now this $300,000, again, it goes to multiple people. So maybe it's sold in increments of $1,000 or $5,000, but it's being sold to multiple people. And you are saying, I will pay you 8% every 6 months. Okay, but on the day that the bond is actually sold, the market, which I like to think about as everybody else, okay, so all the other companies that are floating bonds. So the market, the average price or the average percentage might be higher or lower. So if the day that we go to float our bond or sell our bond, we've promised our investors 8% and the market is paying 10%, well then we have a problem. Why would anybody want to buy our bond if they can go and get 10% from somebody else? So just like you or I walk into Target, let's say, and we pick up an item that's damaged or has a nick in it, the only way we're willing to pay for it, right, as if they reduce the price. And it's the same premise for bonds. If we're paying less than the market in our interest payments, then we have to discount our bond. We have to reduce the selling price of our bond. So bond prices come in terms of numbers. So this 92 is basically saying it's 92% of the bond par value. So to see what our bond would sell at, we would take $300,000 times 92%. Our bond would sell for $276,000. Now that doesn't mean that we have to pay back $276,000. We still have to pay back the whole par value, the whole $300,000. Okay, same thing as if we were paying more. So if we were paying 8% when the marketplace is paying 5%, so all the other companies are only paying 5% and our bond is paying 8%, well then we have a hot commodity bond, right? We've got something that everybody wants. Everybody would want our bond that's paying better interest than everyone else. So in that case, we can charge a premium. We can charge 102%. So you just add a percentage here. 300,000 times 102%. We could sell our bond for more than the par value. We would still only have to pay back par value. Okay. And if it was 103, same premise here, 103% of the bond, 300,000 times 103% would be 309,000. So let's look at journal entries. If we issue the bond at par, meaning we're going to float $1 million bond, and if it's sold at par, that means we're going to get $1 million. So on January 1st, we would get cash of $1 million, and we would have to pay back bond payable of $1 million. It looks just like a note, right? We're just replacing the word note and bond. Okay, so very similar action to a note. All right, on the first semi-annual interest payment, so $630, we have to pay back interest. So our stated interest rate is 10%. So we agree to pay interest of $1 million times 10%, but remember that's an annual rate and we're paying semi-annual interest payments. So we want to multiply that by 1/2 to get it to a semi-annual interest rate. So we're going to make interest payments of $50,000 and record interest expense of $50,000 every 6 months for the next 20 years. Okay, so the same journal entry gets repeated because all we're paying our investors is interest only. So repeated journal entry for 20 years every 6 months. So we're going to make this journal entry a total of 40 times. On the day that we're done making interest payments, we could go ahead and close out the bond and pay our principal back, our par value back. So we would close out this liability and pay back cash. We promised we would pay back the par value of $1 million. Okay, so that's if the bond is sold at par. Okay, if the bond is sold at a discount, remember this is when the market is paying higher than us. So everybody else is paying 12%, we're paying 10%. That means we have to reduce the selling price. So this problem says we're going to sell our bond for 92.6405%. That means we're going to get cash of $1 million times 92.6405%. Okay, so we're going to generate $926,405 of cash. But we're still going to pay back the full par amount. So bond payable still stands at $1 million. All right, the difference between these two numbers, we're going to record to a special account, it's a contra bond account called discounts on bond payable, $73,595. What this account essentially is going to do is it's going to take this difference and it's going to spread it out over the life of the bond to interest expense. Let me put it in a simple term. If I lend you $5 today and I say, okay, at the end of the month, I want $6 to be paid back. What's that extra dollar? It's interest expense, right? If I lend you $5, you have to pay me back $6. That's added interest expense. So this $73,595 will be interest expense. However, we're not paying back today. So we're going to spread this interest expense over the life of the loan. Or it's not a loan, over the life of the bond. So comes our first semi-annual interest payment. We have agreed we will pay according to the stated bond rate of 10%. Okay, so our cash is going to be $1 million times 10% times 1/2. We agreed to pay investors in aggregate $50,000. Okay. However, now we're going to take and amortize this discount. We've got $73,595 and we're going to make 10 total payments. 5 years, 2 payments per year. So $73,595 divided by 10 total payments. A discount starts out as a debit balance. To reduce it, we're going to credit it. So we're going to credit it. We're going to reduce it by $73,595.50, 1/10, because we're going to make 10 payments. Okay, we're going to add these two together, and we're going to record interest expense of $50,000, the actual payment, plus the $73,595.50, the amortization. This is an internal. The $73,595.50 is kind of an internal adjustment. It's just like depreciation expense. We're spreading the $73,595 over the life of the bond. Okay. we're going to make the same journal entry 10 times. So every 6 months for 5 years. When we're done, when we've made our 10th journal entry and we're ready to repay the bond, we're going to close out bond payable, okay, and we're going to pay cash of $1 million. Our bond contract, our bond indenture says we borrow $1 million, we pay stated interest of 10% every 6 months. Okay, the market rate, this 12%, is what drove down the selling price of our bond. Okay, so it takes a little bit of time to get used to this. I recommend you print out this worksheet and practice this a couple of times. Try to get to the point where you don't need to look back at these notes. Okay, it just takes a little work to get the hang of this. Okay, and one last thing here. Discounts start out as a debit. Okay, it has a debit balance. Okay, so D&D, right? Discounts are debited. Or, I'm sorry, they're not debited, but discounts have a debit balance. When you reduce them, you credit them. Okay, now the same thing, the same process occurs with selling bonds at a premium. Here we have a bond that we're going to float. We're agreeing to pay 10%. When we go out to sell the bond, everybody else is paying 8%. Guess what? We have a hot bond here. We can charge a premium, right? We can charge 108.1145% of our bond par value. So there's our cash, $1 million times 108.1145%. Okay, we're going to make $1,081,145 in cash. What do we have to pay back? Par. Okay, so record the bond payable at par. What is the difference? The difference goes to a premium on bond payable account. Premiums start out as a credit. They have a normal credit balance. Okay, same process applies here though. We're going to take this premium and we're going to spread it out over the life of the bond, but unlike discounts that add to our interest expense, premiums are going to reduce the amount of interest expense. So first semi-annual interest payment, we agreed to pay 10%. So our cash is going to be based on the stated rate, $1 million times 10% times 1/2. Okay. We're going to take this premium. It's a normal credit balance. We're going to reduce it by 1/10. It's a 5-year bond. We're going to pay twice a year. We're going to amortize that bond by 10 payments. 81,145 divided by 10. Our premium is amortized by 8114.50. Okay, 1/10 of the original amount. Then we're going to record interest expense, which is going to be the cash payment less this adjustment. So we're going to record less interest expense than we're actually paying out. We're going to repeat this for 10 times, every 6 months for 5 years. When we're done and we actually go to make the bond payment, we're going to close out bond payable. Starts out as a credit. We're going to debit it to close it out, and we're going to credit cash. Okay, again, it's going to take some work to get used to this. Print out the worksheet, practice it until you can get through all the transactions without looking back. All right, here's from your handout. Go ahead and pause the video. Go ahead and try it on your own or follow along. So here we have Elton Company issues a 7% 15-year bond with a par value of $350,000. Okay, so we're agreeing that we will pay back $350,000. We agreed to semi-annual interest payments, which is no surprise. On the issue date, the annual market was 6%. Okay, but remember, we've agreed to 7%. So that means this market rate, which is 6%, means that we will be able to sell for a higher price. So A says, what are the issuer's cash proceeds from the issuance of this bond? Take the par times the percentage. So 350,000 times 109.75. I just converted this 3/4 to a 75. So 3 divided by 4 equals 0.75. Gives us a selling price of $384,125. B says, what's the total amount of bond interest expense? I'm going to table this conversation until we do the journal entry, because once you do the journal entry, you can answer B very easily. So the journal entry then for the issuance of the bonds, we've already calculated the amount of cash we're going to receive. 350 times the percentage, 384, 125. What do we have to pay back? Our bond payable is recorded for 350. The difference is our premium. Premium on bond payable, 34,125. The first semi-annual interest payment, we're going to go ahead and record cash, start with cash, because this is what we agreed to. We agreed 7%, 350,000, the par value, times 7% times 1/2, 12,250. We're going to go ahead and amortize this premium over the life of the bond. It's a 15-year bond, which means we're going to make 30 payments. In this textbook, semi-annual interest payments every 6 months. So 15 years times twice a year, 30 payments. So 34,125 divided by 30. We're going to go ahead and amortize this premium by 1137.50 every 6 months. And our interest expense is going to be reduced. So it's the cash payment less this premium. We're going to record interest expense of $11,112.50. Now to figure out how much interest expense you're going to record over the life of the bond, so part B, just take this $11,112.50 and multiply it by the number of payments. You're going to make 30 total payments. Oops. So $11,112.50 times, how many payments are you going to make? 15-year times twice a year, 30 payments. Our total interest expense, so B is going to be $333,375. It says bond interest expense times 30 payments, $333,375. All right. Now let's go ahead and go into figuring out the bond price. So here we have an example, and this comes from the appendix. Okay, so you're going to need to look at the appendix. You're going to take $1 million. You're going to take $1 million. That's your par value. You're going to figure out what's your interest payments. You're going to use the market rate to figure out what is your selling price. Okay, and it's a 5-year bond. So first thing I always do is I put up together a little chart. So payments, and there's going to be 2 different types of payments. You're going to make your final payment at the end, your $1 million payment, and you're also going to make semi-annual interest payments. Okay, the final payment is going to be paid out once. And you'll notice here I have snippets of present value tables. So if you open your textbook all the way to the back, Appendix B has present value tables. We are going to use 2 of the tables out of this textbook. Present value of 1 and present value of an annuity. You are going to use present value of 1, table B1, whenever you see a payment that occurs once. So present value of 1 is for payments that occur once, like the final payment. But present value of an annuity is made for when you make multiple payments of the same dollar amount. With bonds, our interest payments are the same cash payout every time. So our interest payments are annuities. So we're going to use both of these tables when we're figuring out the bond price. Okay, so when we use our table B1, the thing about tables is we're going to use this market rate whenever we use the tables. So think about the market, the T in market, and remember table. Okay, but this is a 12% annual rate. We want to convert this down to a semi-annual rate. So we want to take it times 1/2. So we're going to use 6%, and then we have to figure out how many periods are we going to make payments. It's a 5-year bond. We're going to pay twice per year. So we're going to make 10 different payments. So using the tables, we're going to go across to 10, down at 6. Our present value factor for our final payment, because this is the present value of 1, is 0.5584. So 1 million times 0.5584 equals our present value for the final payment, $558,400. Do the same thing for the bond interest payment. Now first we have to figure out what is our bond interest payment. It's $1 million times the stated interest rate. So $1 million times 10% times 1/2. That's our normal 50,000, right, that we've been working with. But now let's use the tables. 6%, remember, the market, half the market rate. 10 payments. If you go down at 6, across at 10, that's 7.3601. So 50,000 times 7.3601 gives you the present value of those interest payments is $368,005. When you add them together, our issue price is $926,405, which makes sense. We're issuing a $1 million bond, but we're only paying 10% when the market is paying 12%. We have to discount this bond. Now here's an example from your worksheet. So go ahead and try it on your own, or you can follow along. So here we have Flagstaff Systems issues bonds dated January 1st. They pay interest semi-annually. Again, no surprise. The bonds have a $90,000 par value, an annual contract rate of 12%. So that's going to determine the interest payment, right? 90,000 times 12% times 1/2. They mature in 5 years. We have 10 total payments. Okay. For each of the following situations, which I'm only giving you one, determine the bond's issue price, prepare the journal entry, and determine the amount of semi-annual interest payments. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out the price. So we set up our table, payments times the present value factor times present value. We've got 2 payments, the final payment and the interest payment. The final payment is going to be $90,000, but we need to figure out what is the present value factor. Now remember, the market rate is what we're going to use. So the market rate is 10%, but that's an annual market rate. So you take your half of your market rate. We're using 10 payments because it's a 5-year times 2 payments per year. We're going to multiply. Our present value factor is going to be 0.6139. Okay, so 90,000, our par value, times 0.6139 is our present value. Then we need to figure out the interest payment. The interest payment is the bond times the contract rate of 12% times 1/2, 5,400. We're going to use the annuity table to figure out this. So again, 5% because we're using half the market rate, and 10%. Our present value factor for the annuity is 7.7217. So 5,400, the interest payment, times 7.7217 is 41,697.18. Add those two together, our total present value, or our total selling price, is $97,204.18. Ask yourself, does that make sense? We're paying 12%. The market, everybody else is paying 10%. We're able to upcharge our bond, right? Our bond has a par value of $90,000. We're charging $97,204. Sounds good. Hey, again, this process is just going to take some work. Print these worksheets out and try them again. Hey, let's go ahead and make the journal entry. So the day that we sell the bond, we're going to get cash of $97,204.18. We agreed to pay back our bond payable, our par value, $90,000. The difference is the premium. Okay, that's our journal entry. The final question says, what's the amount of each semi-annual interest payment? Well, we already figured out the actual payment, so the cash payment is $54,000. But let's go ahead and look at the journal entry here. So our cash payment is going to be $5,400, but we're going to amortize that premium over 10 payments. It's a 5-year bond, 2 payments per year. So we're going to amortize that by $720.42. Okay, and then our interest expense is going to be the difference between the cash payment less the premium, $4,679.58. Okay, again, a lot of getting used to the topics in this chapter. You just need practice. The last part of this chapter is talking about notes payable. Now, I'm just going to walk you through an amortization table because I think sometimes looking at these tables, even though it's going to tell you all the steps, it takes a little bit of practice to get used to it. The first thing that you need to do in this table is to figure out how much is your cash payment. You can do that by taking the bond, the borrowing amount, I'm sorry, not bond, but this is a note, so the note amount, $200,000, and divide that by the present value factor. Now, what you need to ask yourself is is this payment going to occur once or more than once? It's a note with a 5-year annual payment. So you're going to pay this back 5 in 5 installments. That means it's an annuity. So take the annuity, go over to 5, down to 5, and over to 8%. The annual interest rate is 8%, but you're only paying it once per year. So you do not need to reduce this interest amount. So over to 8, down to 5, you're going to get a present value factor of 3.9927. So the note amount divided by the present value factor of an annuity gives you your cash payments. So you have to make 5 cash payments. And you can do this for a car loan or a mortgage payment. You just have to go through these steps. Okay, take your beginning balance. So we're borrowing $200,000. On the first payment, you're going to multiply this by 8%, okay, your annual interest rate. That's how much the bank is going to keep for interest expense. Okay, but the difference between your $50,091 and $16,000 that's going to be kept for interest is the reduction in your notes payable. Okay, so this is how much you're going to reduce your loan by. So $200,000 less the loan reduction gives you your ending balance. The next year you're going to carry that forward. So $165,909 is your starting point the next year. Times 8%, okay, our interest rate, gives you how much the bank's going to keep in interest, $13,272. Okay, the difference between your cash payment and the amount that the bank's going to keep is $36,819. The beginning note balance less the $36,819 gives your ending note balance, $129,090. That balance is going to carry forward in the third year. Take $129,090 times 8%, that's how much the bank's going to keep for interest. The difference between your cash payment, $50,091, and the $10,327.20 is how much we're going to reduce the note by, $37,963.80. Beginning note balance less the $39,763.80 gives you an ending note balance of $89,326.20. That carries forward in year 4. Times 8% is $7146.10. The difference between your $50,091 and your interest expense is $42,944.90. Beginning note balance less your reduction gives you your ending note balance, $46,382.14. Year 5, that becomes, oops, what happens? This should carry down, okay, $42,382.14 times 8%. You've got interest expense of $37,1057. $50,000 minus your interest equals $46,380.43. Your beginning note balance of $46,382.14 less your reduction in principal. Basically, it comes out to $1.71, but that's rounding. So we would just go ahead and reduce. We would adjust either column B or column C at the end here. Okay. So again, you can use this whole principle and you can actually use it in your own life to see, okay, this is what's going to happen when we make extra payments on a car loan or a student loan or a home loan. See how much paying down extra is going to reduce the amount of interest expense, and it's going to increase the amount that you're paying on your principal. Okay, so you guys will have a homework problem that you can look at. I believe your Excel assignment also looks at this too. So, all right, if you have any questions, please don't wait. Go ahead and seek out help either through myself or the tutoring center. Have a great day.